As they were led onto the rescue ship, Aisha felt a surge of gratitude, but it was quickly tempered by the weight of what she knew. This wasn't over. The fragments were still out there, and the signal's reach extended far beyond what they had imagined. As the rescue ship set course for Earth, Aisha made a silent vow. She would ensure that humanity was prepared for what was coming. The fight wasn't over, and she would be ready. Because somewhere in the vastness of space, the signal was still waiting. Still watching. Still hungry. As the rescue ship cruised through the void toward Earth, Aisha sat in the medical bay, her thoughts churning. Ravi and Arif were resting nearby, their faces pale but peaceful. The rescuers had provided them with sustenance and medical attention, but for Aisha, no amount of physical aid could ease the weight pressing on her mind. She stared out of the small viewport, the stars seeming both beautiful and ominous. Somewhere out there, fragments of the signal were spreading, searching, waiting for the right moment to strike again. Her heart clenched at the thought of Earth, her home blissfully unaware of the danger. A member of the rescue crew entered, a young woman with a tablet in hand. "Dr. Aisha, the captain would like to speak with you." Aisha nodded, rising to her feet. She followed the woman to the bridge, where the captain, a tall, stern-faced man, was waiting. He turned to her, his expression serious. "Dr. Aisha, we've reviewed the preliminary data from your pod systems. It seems you encountered something extraordinary." "That's putting it lightly," Aisha replied, her voice flat. "The signal we intercepted wasn't just a message. It was a weapon. An intelligence, and it's still out there," the captain frowned. "We've sent a report to Earth Command, but it will take time to process. You'll need to explain everything once we arrive. They'll want to debrief you thoroughly." Aisha nodded, her mind already racing ahead. She needed to ensure that humanity understood the magnitude of the threat. She needed to warn them no, prepare them for what was coming. "And the others?" the captain asked. "Are they fit for questioning? They've been through hell," Aisha said. "But they'll talk. They'll back me up." The captain studied her for a moment, then sighed. "We'll do what we can. But this kind of information, it's going to cause panic if it gets out." "It's better than ignorance," Aisha said firmly. "Panic can be managed. What can't be managed is this thing spreading unchecked." The captain nodded, though his expression remained grim. "Understood. We'll make sure your story is heard." As Aisha left the bridge, a plan began to form in her mind. She would use every resource available to her to study the fragments, to trace their paths, and to find a way to stop them. This wasn't just about survival, it was about understanding the enemy. When they finally arrived at Earth, the trio was whisked away to a secure facility. Aisha, Ravi, and Arif spent days recounting their experience to teams of scientists and officials. Their story was met with skepticism at first, but the data retrieved from the pods silenced the doubters. The signal's patterns were undeniable, its purpose chillingly clear. Aisha became the focal point of an emergency task force assembled to address the threat. Her expertise in astrobiology and her first-hand knowledge of the signal made her indispensable. But as the weeks turned into months, the enormity of the task began to weigh on her. The signal's fragments were elusive, spreading through the cosmos in ways that defied conventional understanding. Late one night, as Aisha pored over endless streams of data, Ravi entered her office. He set down a cup of coffee, his expression tired but supportive. "Still at it?" he asked. "I can't stop," Aisha replied, her voice edged with frustration. "Every second we waste, that thing gets closer. We've delayed it, but we haven't stopped it." Ravi leaned against the desk, his gaze thoughtful. "You can't do this alone, Aisha. You need help more than just us." She looked at him, her resolve firm. "Then we find the help. We build a team. We build defenses. Whatever it takes." Ravi nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I knew you'd say that. Let's get to work." Months turned into years, and humanity's understanding of the signal grew. Aisha led efforts to develop technologies capable of tracking and disrupting its fragments, forming alliances with scientists, engineers, and visionaries from around the world. The fight was far from over, but humanity was no longer blind to the threat. And somewhere, in the cold vastness of space, the signal pulsed faintly, biding its time, waiting for the next opportunity to awaken, waiting for the next chance to consume. Years passed, and the fight against the signal became a defining chapter in humanity's history. The urgency of the threat had united nations, spurring unprecedented collaboration across science, engineering, and defense. Under Aisha's leadership, a global initiative, Project Aegis, was established, dedicated to tracking and neutralizing the fragments of the signal before they could awaken. Aisha had become a reluctant symbol of resilience and determination. Her face graced broadcasts, her speeches inspired hope, but behind the scenes she worked tirelessly, her mind consumed by the signal's lingering presence. Every breakthrough felt like a small victory, but she knew the signal's intelligence was vast, its reach infinite. One evening, Aisha stood in the command center of Project Aegis, staring at a holographic map of the galaxy. Glowing red markers represented known fragments of the signal, their spread painstakingly tracked by deep space sensors. A new alert pinged, a fragment detected on the edge of a distant star system. Another one, Ravi said, stepping up beside her. He had remained by her side through the years, a steadfast ally in the relentless battle. That's the fifth one. This month Aisha's jaw tightened. They're accelerating. The signal isn't just spreading, it's coordinating. Arif joined them, now heading the engineering division of Project Aegis. We've made progress with the disruptor arrays, he said, pulling up schematics on the display. But we need to deploy them closer to the fragments if we want to contain the spread and risk lives in the process, Ravi added, his tone heavy. Every mission out there is a gamble. The fragments are getting smarter. We've lost ships before Aisha's mind raced. The signal wasn't just a passive force, it was adapting, learning from every encounter. She turned to Arif. What about the prototype? The containment vessel, can it handle a fragment? Arif hesitated. Theoretically, yes, but it's untested. If it fails, it won't fail, Aisha interrupted, her voice firm. We need to start taking bigger risks. Every fragment we leave unchecked brings us closer to losing this fight. The mission to contain the newly detected fragment was launched days later. Aisha insisted on leading it, despite protests from her team. She boarded the ship alongside a hand-picked crew of scientists and engineers, their faces a mixture of determination and fear. The containment vessel, a gleaming sphere of reinforced alloys and experimental tech, was their last hope for trapping and neutralizing the fragment. As the ship approached the fragment's location, the tension was palpable. The signal's hum began to seep into the ship's systems, distorting sensors and communications. The crew worked quickly, deploying the containment vessel into position. Energy levels are spiking, Arif reported over the comms. He was monitoring the mission from the ground. The fragment knows you're there. Aisha's heart pounded as she stared at the fragment through the viewport. It was a pulsating mass of shifting light and shadow, its presence both beautiful and terrifying. The containment vessel's systems activated, projecting a field designed to trap the fragment. For a moment, it seemed to work. The fragment pulsed wildly, its form shrinking as the containment field closed in. But then, the ship shuddered violently. The fragment lashed out, tendrils of energy striking the vessel and disrupting the containment field. It's resisting, a crew member shouted, panic in their voice. Reinforce the field, Aisha commanded, her mind racing. Divert all power to the vessel. The ship's lights flickered as energy surged into the containment system. The fragment's tendrils receded, and with a final pulse, it was drawn into the vessel. The sphere's surface glowed brightly, then dimmed as the fragment was sealed inside. Cheers erupted on the ship, but Aisha remained tense. This was one victory, but the signal was far from defeated. Back on Earth, the containment vessel was transported to a secure facility for study. Aisha watched as it was lowered into a heavily fortified chamber, her thoughts heavy. They had captured one fragment, but how many more were out there? And what would happen if the containment failed? Late that night, she sat alone in her office, staring at the vessel's data on her screen. The fragment's energy patterns were erratic, as if it were testing its confines, searching for weaknesses. Aisha felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't over. The signal was still watching, still waiting, and she couldn't shake the feeling that their greatest battle was yet to come. The containment vessel hummed faintly in its fortified chamber, surrounded by layers of impenetrable alloys, energy-dampening fields, and automated defenses. Scientists and engineers worked tirelessly around it, analyzing the fragment's behavior and energy patterns. The fragment pulsed rhythmically, almost as if alive, its light flickering in ways that seemed calculated, purposeful. Aisha watched from the observation deck above, her face etched with exhaustion. Months had passed since the fragment's capture, and while they had managed to contain it, they had learned very little about its true nature. Every test, every probe seemed to provoke a response, a subtle shift in the fragment's energy, as though it were taunting them. "What's it doing now?" Aisha asked, her voice sharp as she turned to Arif, who stood beside her. Arif glanced at the data tablet in his hands, same as before. "It's stable but active. It's like it's trying to communicate, but the patterns are too complex to decode." Aisha's gaze lingered on the vessel. "It's not trying to communicate with us, it's trying to communicate with the other fragments." Arif sighed, rubbing his temples. "That's the worst-case scenario. If it finds a way to bridge the gap, it won't." Aisha interrupted, her voice firm. "We won't let it." Despite Aisha's confidence, the fragment's behavior grew more erratic. Over time, its pulses became stronger, creating faint disturbances in the containment field. The team worked around the clock to stabilize the system, but the fragment seemed to be learning, adapting to every countermeasure. One evening, as Aisha reviewed the latest data in her office, Ravi stormed in, his face pale. "We have a problem," he said, dropping a tablet on her desk. Aisha picked it up, her eyes narrowing as she read the report. The fragment's energy emissions had spiked dramatically, resonating with frequencies that matched the original signal they had encountered years ago. "It's signaling," Aisha muttered, her chest tightening. "How far could this reach?" Ravi shook his head. "We don't know. It's contained, but the energy levels are off the charts. If it keeps this up, it could attract the other fragments," Aisha finished grimly. "Or worse, awaken them." The facility went into full lockdown as the team scrambled to reinforce the containment field. Layers of energy barriers were added, and emergency protocols were enacted. Despite their efforts, the fragment's pulses intensified, the hum growing louder and more unsettling. It was no longer passive, it was fighting back. Aisha called an emergency meeting with the core team. Around the table sat Ravi, Arif, and key scientists and engineers, their faces shadowed with fear and fatigue. "We're running out of time," Aisha said, her voice steady but urgent. "If this fragment breaches containment, it could undo everything we've worked for. We need a permanent solution." "What kind of solution?" one of the scientists asked. "The containment vessel is already the strongest design we have. Anything else risks destabilizing it further." Aisha took a deep breath. "We've been trying to study the fragment, understand it, but maybe we're looking at this the wrong way. Instead of containing it, we need to destroy it." The room fell silent. Ravi broke it, his tone skeptical. "Destroy it? You've seen what it's capable of. If we try to overload it, we could cause an explosion that wipes out this entire facility." "We don't have a choice," Aisha said. "This isn't just about this fragment. It's about stopping the signal before it's too late. If we can destroy one fragment, we can figure out how to destroy the others." Arif leaned forward, his expression grim. "We'd need to use a controlled quantum destabilization, something that disrupts the fragment's core energy without triggering a chain reaction. And that's assuming it works," Ravi added. "If it doesn't," Aisha's gaze hardened. "If it doesn't, then at least we tried. Doing nothing isn't an option." Preparations for the operation began immediately. The team constructed a specialized destabilization chamber designed to direct the fragment's energy inward, forcing it to collapse on itself. The process was risky. Any miscalculation could unleash the fragment's full power, with catastrophic consequences. On the day of the operation, Aisha stood in the control room, her hands clenched into fists as she watched the team secure the containment vessel in the destabilization chamber. Arif and Ravi flanked her, their expressions tense. "All systems are online," a technician reported. "We're ready to begin." "Proceed," Aisha said, her voice steady. The chamber activated, its walls glowing as energy beams converged on the containment vessel. The fragment pulsed wildly, its light growing brighter as it resisted the destabilization process. The hum became a deafening roar, reverberating through the facility. Energy levels are spiking. Someone shouted. "It's pushing back, hold the field," Aisha commanded. "We can't let it breach." The chamber trembled, and for a moment it seemed as though the fragment would break free. But then, with a final surge of energy, the light from the containment vessel dimmed, and the hum ceased. The room fell silent. "It's gone," Arif said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We did it." Relief swept through the control room, but Aisha's expression remained stoic. This was only one fragment. The fight was far from over, but they had proven it could be done. As she turned to leave, her mind already racing with plans for the next step, a faint, familiar pulse echoed through the monitors. Aisha froze, her blood running cold. The signal wasn't gone. It had merely shifted. Somewhere, in the vastness of space, it was still waiting, still watching. And now it knew they were capable of fighting back. The faint pulse resonating through the monitors sent a chilling wave through the control room. Ayesha turned slowly, her heart pounding. The team around her froze, their expressions shifting from relief to dread. The signal wasn't gone, it had adapted, its faint echo a warning. A challenge. Ravi broke the silence, his voice shaking. "How? We destroyed it. We watched it collapse. It's not just one fragment," Aisha said, her voice low and steady despite the storm raging in her mind. "The signal is decentralized, spread across countless points in the galaxy. Destroying one fragment doesn't eliminate it. It shifts, recalibrates, and finds new ways to survive." Arif leaned heavily on the console, his face pale. "So, this was all for nothing?" No, Aisha said firmly, her gaze locking with his. "We proved it can be disrupted. That's a start. But we need to think bigger, smarter." The days that followed were a blur of frantic activity. Aisha convened emergency meetings with the leaders of Project Aegis, urging them to accelerate their efforts. The destruction of the fragment had bought them time, but it was clear the signal was evolving, its fragments learning from every encounter. "We need to shift our focus," Aisha said during one meeting, pacing in front of a holographic display of the galaxy. "Containment isn't enough. Neutralization isn't enough. We have to go after the signal at its source." The room erupted into murmurs of concern and doubt. One scientist spoke up, his voice hesitant. "Dr. Aisha, we don't even know where the source is. The signal's origin has eluded us for years." "That's because we've been looking for a physical source," Aisha replied, her voice sharp. "What if the signal isn't coming from a single location? What if it's networked and intelligence spread across space, using its fragments as extensions of itself?" Ravi crossed his arms, his brow furrowed. "And how do you propose we fight something that's everywhere we outthink it?" Aisha said. "If it's a network, then it has vulnerabilities. Every system has a flaw, an Achilles heel. We need to find it." The idea of targeting the signal's network sparked a new wave of research. Teams worked around the clock to analyze the data from the destroyed fragment, searching for patterns that could reveal how the fragments were connected. Aisha immersed herself in the work, her mind consumed by the task. Weeks turned into months, and progress was painstakingly slow. The signal's network was unlike anything humanity had encountered, a system that seemed to defy the laws of physics, operating on principles beyond their understanding. But piece by piece, the team uncovered fragments of the puzzle. One breakthrough came when Arif discovered a faint resonance pattern in the destroyed fragment's remains. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it hinted at a central node, a hub where the signal's intelligence might converge. "This could be it," Arif said, excitement and trepidation mingling in his voice. "If we can find this hub, we might have a chance to disrupt the entire network, or we might trigger something we're not ready for." Ravi countered, his tone grim. "We're dealing with something that survived for who knows how long. If we poke the bear, it's a risk we have to take," Aisha said. "If we don't act, the signal will keep spreading. It's only a matter of time before it overwhelms us." Months later, the location of the central node was pinpointed, a distant, uncharted region of space surrounded by gravitational anomalies. The area was a dead zone for conventional communications, as if the fabric of space itself had been warped by the signal's presence. Aisha led the mission herself, alongside a team of elite scientists and engineers. The journey to the node was treacherous, the ship navigating through spatial distortions and gravitational shifts. As they approached, the signal's hum grew louder, resonating through the ship and into their very bones. The node itself was a massive structure, unlike anything they had encountered. It was a sprawling web of pulsating light and shadow, its tendrils stretching into the void like the roots of an ancient, malevolent tree. The air on the ship grew heavy as the crew stared in awe and terror. "This is it," Aisha said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. The heart of the signal, the team worked quickly, deploying experimental disruptors designed to sever the node's connections. But as they activated the devices, the node reacted. Tendrils of energy lashed out, striking the ship and throwing the crew into chaos. "It's fighting back," Arif shouted, gripping the console as alarms blared around him. "Hold your ground," Aisha commanded. "We can't back down now." The battle was fierce, the ship trembling under the assault of the signal's power. But the disruptors held, their energy cutting through the node's defenses. Bit by bit, the web began to unravel, its pulsating light dimming. Just as victory seemed within reach, the node released a final, desperate pulse. The ship shuddered violently, its systems failing one by one. Aisha clung to her station, her vision blurring as the light from the node engulfed them. In that moment, she saw flashes of something of vast, alien intelligence stretching across the cosmos, ancient and incomprehensible. It wasn't just a signal. It was a being, a consciousness, and it had been watching them all along. And then, everything went dark. Her body ached, and her head throbbed as she blinked against the faint glow of emergency lights. The ship's systems were offline, the hum of its engines replaced by an eerie stillness. For a moment, she struggled to piece together what had happened. The node, the final pulse, the overwhelming light, it all came rushing back in fragmented flashes. "Ravi." "Arif," she croaked, her voice weak. A faint groan answered her. She turned to see Ravi pulling himself up from the floor, his movements sluggish but determined. "I'm here," he said, his voice hoarse. "What? What happened?" "I don't know," Aisha replied, forcing herself to her feet. "We need to check on the others." They found Arif slumped against a console, his breathing shallow but steady. As they roused him, the ship trembled slightly, as though caught in a gentle gravitational pull. Aisha's gaze snapped to the viewport, and what she saw sent a chill down her spine. In its place was an empty void, a patch of space darker than any she'd ever seen. It wasn't just an absence of light, it was an absence of everything. The stars themselves seemed to curve away from it, as if repelled by its presence. "It's not possible," Arif whispered, staring at the anomaly. "Where did it go?" Aisha's mind raced. The node's final pulse had been more than an act of defense, it had been an act of preservation. Somehow, the intelligence behind the signal had folded space around itself, retreating into an inaccessible dimension. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. The ship limped back to Earth, its crew battered but alive. The debriefing was intense, the Council of Project Aegis hanging on every word of Aisha's account. The destruction of the node was hailed as a victory, but Aisha's warnings about its retreat cast a shadow over the celebration. "This isn't over," she told the Council. "We disrupted the node, but the signal's intelligence is still out there. It's regrouping, adapting. Next time it won't be caught off guard, and what do you suggest we do?" one of the officials asked, his tone skeptical. "We've thrown everything we have at this thing, and it barely made a dent." Aisha met his gaze, her voice unwavering. "We prepare for the next encounter. We keep advancing our technology, expanding our understanding of the signal, and we don't stop fighting. This isn't just about survival, it's about proving that humanity can stand against something greater than itself." The room fell silent, the weight of her words sinking in. Finally, the Council agreed to expand Project Aegis, dedicating more resources to studying the signal's behavior and origins. Aisha was placed in charge of a new initiative, Project Nexus, tasked with uncovering the signal's ultimate purpose and finding a way to end it once and for all. Months turned into years, and the work continued. Humanity's brightest minds came together under Aisha's leadership, their efforts pushing the boundaries of science and technology. They developed advanced AI systems capable of analyzing the signal's patterns, spacecraft designed to navigate the most hostile regions of space, and weapons that could disrupt even the most resilient fragments. Despite the progress, Aisha never allowed herself to grow complacent. She knew the signal was waiting, biding its time, and as much as she hated to admit it, part of her feared it was learning from their efforts. One night, as she stood alone in the observation deck of the Nexus facility, staring out at the stars, Ravi joined her. He handed her a cup of coffee, his expression thoughtful. "Do you ever think about what it wants?" he asked quietly. "The signal, I mean. Why it's doing all this all the time," Aisha admitted. "It's more than just survival. It's intelligent, deliberate. It has a purpose, but I don't think we're capable of fully understanding it. Not yet." Ravi leaned against the railing, his gaze distant. "What if it's not just trying to destroy us? What if it's trying to make us?" "Something else." Aisha turned to him, her brow furrowed. "Something else. Think about it," Ravi said. "Every time we encounter a fragment, it changes us, forces us to adapt, to evolve. Maybe it's not just a threat. Maybe it's a test." Aisha considered his words, a shiver running down her spine. It was a possibility she hadn't allowed herself to entertain, but one that lingered in the back of her mind. If the signal was a test, then the stakes were higher than she'd ever imagined. As the stars stretched endlessly before her, Aisha made a silent vow: whatever the signal's purpose, whatever the cost, she would ensure that humanity endured. This was a fight for their very existence, and she would not back down. The Prometheus hurtled through the dimensional rift, its hull groaning under the strain of the unnatural forces around it. Inside, Aisha, Ravi, Arif, and the rest of the crew held their breaths, their gazes locked on the shifting void outside the viewport. The signal's domain stretched endlessly before them, an abstract expanse of pulsating lights and shadowy tendrils, each twisting and curling like living entities. "This is it," Aisha said, her voice steady but heavy with determination. "We've entered the core." The ship's systems struggled to maintain functionality in the alien dimension. Warning lights flickered on the consoles, and a faint hum resonated through the walls, a reminder that they were now inside the heart of the enemy. The core intelligence of the signal wasn't just a location, it was a presence, alive and aware of their arrival. "He knows we're here," Ravi murmured, staring at the undulating tendrils outside. "We've got maybe minutes before it reacts, then we use every second," Aisha said. "Ravi, Arif, prepare the disruptor array. We need to neutralize its energy network before it can adapt." The ship's AI guided them to a central structure within the domain, a monolithic construct of shifting, fractal patterns that seemed to defy reality. Tendrils of light and shadow extended from the construct, weaving into an intricate web that stretched infinitely in all directions. Aisha's voice faltered for the first time as she gazed at it. "That's the core. The nexus of the signal, it's massive," Arif said, his voice tinged with awe and fear. "How do we even begin to disrupt something like that?" "We stick to the plan," Aisha replied, her resolve hardening. "We target the energy nodes feeding the nexus. If we can sever enough of them, the entire system should collapse." As the team initiated the disruptor array, the signal responded. The tendrils outside began to twist and lash violently, slamming into the Prometheus and sending shockwaves through its hull. The crew struggled to stay on their feet as alarms blared and the lights flickered. "It's trying to repel us," Ravi shouted over the noise. "Shields are failing." "Hold your ground," Aisha commanded. "Focus on the disruptors." The first disruptor fired, sending a pulse of energy toward one of the nodes. The node exploded in a brilliant burst of light, and the nexus trembled. The tendrils recoiled briefly, but they quickly regrouped, their movements more aggressive and deliberate. A voice, deep, resonant, and alien, filled the ship. It wasn't spoken aloud, but echoed within their minds, a direct intrusion into their thoughts. "You dare challenge me," the signal said. Its tone was calm, almost curious, yet laced with a menacing undertone. "You, who are fractured and chaotic, dare to defy unity." Aisha clenched her fists, her voice firm. "Unity at the cost of individuality is no unity at all. Humanity won't be consumed by you," the signal's voice pulsed again, this time colder. "You misunderstand. I do not consume. I elevate. Your chaos will destroy you. I offer order. Perfection, your version of perfection, erases what makes us human," Aisha said. "We choose freedom. Even if it's flawed." The nexus trembled, and the tendrils surged toward the ship, their movements more coordinated. The Prometheus shuddered violently as the shields gave way, and sparks flew from the consoles. "Disruptor 2, fire now," Aisha shouted. Arif slammed the controls, and the second disruptor fired, severing another energy node. The nexus dimmed briefly, but the remaining nodes began pulsing more rapidly, compensating for the loss. "It's adapting," Ravi said, panic creeping into his voice. "If we don't take out the rest now, we won't get another chance." The crew scrambled to prepare the final disruptors as the signal unleashed its full fury. Tendrils breached the ship's hull, slithering into the corridors like living shadows. They moved with a terrifying purpose, absorbing energy and disrupting systems as they advanced. Grabbed a weapon from the emergency locker and motioned to Ravi and Arif. "You two finish the disruptors. I'll buy you time. You're not going alone," Ravi protested, but Aisha cut him off. "There's no time to argue. Trust me." With a reluctant nod, Ravi and Arif returned to their stations as Aisha moved into the corridors. The tendrils were everywhere, their movements erratic and menacing. She fired bursts of energy, forcing them to retreat momentarily, but they reformed almost instantly. "It's testing me," she muttered, her mind racing. The signal wasn't just attacking, it was analyzing her, probing her weaknesses. As she fought her way through the ship, a tendril brushed against her arm. A sharp, cold sensation shot through her, and for a moment her vision blurred. Images flooded her mind, visions of a civilization long gone, their forms merging into light and shadow as they gave themselves to the signal. "See what I have achieved," the signal's voice echoed in her mind. "A perfect existence. No conflict, no pain, no death. Join us and you will understand," Aisha gritted, her teeth forcing the images away. "That's not perfection. That's surrender." She fired another burst, severing the tendril, and pushed forward. Back on the bridge, Ravi and Arif activated the final disruptors. The array unleashed a synchronized pulse, targeting the remaining nodes around the nexus. One by one, the nodes exploded, and the nexus began to destabilize. Its once vibrant light flickered erratically, and the tendrils recoiled. "We're doing it," Ravi shouted, his voice filled with both relief and urgency. But as the last node fell, the nexus released a final, desperate surge of energy. The ship was engulfed in a blinding light, and Aisha felt herself lifted off the ground. For a moment, everything went silent. When she opened her eyes, she was no longer on the Prometheus. She stood in an endless expanse of light, facing a figure that seemed both human and alien. It was the signal, its core consciousness manifesting before her. "You have destroyed my network," the signal said, its voice calm but tinged with sorrow. "You have severed my connections. But I remain, and you always will," Aisha said. "Because you can't force us to be something we're not. Humanity isn't perfect, but we choose to live with our imperfections." The signal tilted its head, as if considering her words. "Your chaos will destroy you," maybe, Aisha said. "But at least it will be our choice." The light around her began to dim, and the signal's form flickered. "You are brave," it said, "and foolish, but you have earned your freedom." For now, with those final words, the light faded, and Aisha found herself back on the Prometheus. The ship was battered but intact, and the nexus outside had collapsed into nothingness. The Prometheus returned to Earth to a hero's welcome, but Aisha felt no joy in the victory. The signal was gone, its network destroyed, but its final words lingered in her mind. For now, the threat wasn't over, it had merely been delayed. As humanity celebrated its survival, Project Nexus shifted its focus. Instead of waiting for the signal to return, they began preparing for the next encounter. Aisha spearheaded the effort, her resolve stronger than ever. One night, as she stood on the observation deck, staring at the stars, Ravi joined her. "Do you think it'll come back?" he asked quietly. Aisha nodded. "Yes, it's still out there, somewhere. Watching, waiting. But we'll be ready," Ravi said, his voice steady. Aisha smiled faintly. "Yes, we will." The stars shimmered in the vastness of space, silent witnesses to humanity's resilience. The signal had tested them, and they had endured. Whatever came next, Aisha knew one thing: humanity would face it together, flawed but unbroken. Thank you so much for watching this video. I truly appreciate your time and attention. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more exciting content. Your support means the world to me and helps me create even more amazing videos for you. Stay tuned, and I'll see you in the next one.